Hello everyone, Sientir here with another Rambler for you, and today I want to talk about the education system in the United States of America, predominantly because I'm in no way qualified to talk about the education system in any other country, having not experienced them in any way. So I'm going to do this primarily focusing from both my memories of when I went through the education system, which does have some gaps as homeschooled for a brief period because I did not like certain elements of public school. But I'm also going to talk some about my experiences from being a tutor, specifically a math tutor. A lot of what my focus is going to be on is what is the purpose of school? What is it trying to accomplish? And I want to kind of critique a lot of what's being done in our current systems because I don't feel like they're accomplishing what ought to be accomplished through education. So let's kind of start by defining some parameters. The first one is, what is the purpose of education? What's it trying to do? So I think from a public standpoint, so there's different types of education, and I'm not going to talk about all of them. I'm going to focus on public school education. What is the purpose of having kids go to school? Predominantly, it seems to me, aside from potential sort of child care that can be provided, the large goal of public school education is to prepare kids to be functional citizens. So for that, I need to define what is a functional citizen. So I would view a functional citizen as somebody who is able to contribute to society, to the workings of the United States of America from a financial and political standpoint. So there are a couple of things that are clearly very important to this. One of these is having employable skills. It's obviously very important that somebody has skills that enable them to be employed and employable. That's going to help tremendously, obviously. Another one is being able to be an effective member of a democracy. So a democracy requires a sufficiently educated populace to be able to work correctly. This is because you need a population that is able to make good decisions. And if your population is not educated enough, they're not provided with the techniques and the information and the framework necessary to make those decisions. So, looking at sort of these goals, that kids who graduate from high school would be equipped at least with some baseline skills for being able to contribute to the economy. I know that secondary education is important, and I think it's probably a little overly important for reasons that I'll probably touch on as I go through this. And the other being able to be effective citizens and to have the framework for being independent citizens. So when we think about this, there's a couple of things that then immediately play out. The first one, just to focus a bit on skills. So what skills are needed to succeed in today's economy? Well, that's a very interesting question because the question then needs to become what part of the economy. This is where, for example, I think we overemphasize STEM, especially mathematics. Yes, I said overemphasize, not under. The reason for this is because not everybody is particularly gifted mathematically, and I don't think we should force people to learn high-level math. So I do math tutoring. The amount of math that I've had to reacquaint myself with in order to teach high school students has been staggering. I'm also a computer programmer. If I, as a computer programmer, have to refamiliarize myself with mathematics that we're teaching high schoolers because I do not use it as a computer programmer, that probably means we're overteaching math, or at least requiring more of everyone than is necessary. So what I would generally propose is, particularly for this particular angle, is having a system that says, hey, here are what these career fields need. Here are the classes that teach those skills, or at least on-ramp you towards it, if we're going to focus on having post-high school education being an important part of getting a job. Now, I personally would prefer to see more apprenticeship programs and things along those lines to make sure people get actual industry experience, because pure academic experience is probably a little overrated. Now, I would add that it's helpful, I think, for people to have introductory courses, but let me not get ahead of myself. One of the things that I would greatly critique the system as a whole about is needing to teach specific skills for the modern world. So, what do I mean? For example, when we're teaching history, we tend to emphasize when stuff happened. And to some extent, that's important because we need to have the ability to contextualize things in relationship to each other. And the dates help with that. However, this is also readily available information thanks to the internet. A lot of our education system, and I don't know how things have adapted since I was in school, but a lot of our education system, from what I've heard, continues to be based on the idea of rote memorization of information. This is the smartphone age. We have Wikipedia, we have search engines like Google and Bing. These are at our fingertips so often. When's the last time you had to know a piece of information off the top of your head right now? Follow-up question. Are you an emergency physician? This is a serious, it's so easy to be able to look stuff up that in the real world, that's what you're going to do. And if you need to look something up enough, you're going to memorize it through use rather than having to cram it into your brain. So this is one area where I think a lot of stuff is failing. There's an overemphasis on memorization over techniques for looking stuff up and verifying data. Memorization over verifying sourcing. So if you're going to look something up, you want to make sure you're looking it up at a place that's reliable, or at least reliable enough. The skill of being able to determine that is more important than being able to memorize the data in the first place, because, again, this is how people operate. Now, let's look at something else that I think is an area of great critique, which is grading. Specifically, one of the things that's important in today's age is innovation and creativity. Both of these are going to require being able to overcome failure. Unfortunately, our public education system, due to the way grades work, encourages risk-averse behavior. I know for myself, when I was a wee youngster, I would, and this is what my mom tells me because I don't fully remember it, but I would intentionally try to choose stuff that I knew would be easy for me to do. Why? So I could get it done with, yes, but also so that way I could reliably maintain good grades. I was risk-averse because bad grades were bad. And we have this problem that our education system teaches us to be afraid of failure because it is extremely damaging to the school career, or can be, to a student's progress through our education system. If that's going to be the case, then we are setting people up to avoid failure and be risk-averse when what we need is people who are willing to try risks and willing to try stuff that may or may not work out, particularly when you're trying to be creative. When you're trying to come up with something new, you have to just try stuff that might not work, where you're like, well, this probably won't work, but I don't know for sure and I need to know. You need to be able to do that, and in order to do that, you have to overcome an education system that's taught you to avoid taking risks so you don't damage your grade and your possibilities for the future. This is another area where I think that there's a lot of room for improvement. And I'm honestly all for people being able to have second chances to try something, to get something right. For approaches that teach that failure is an important part of learning, not that you have to avoid failure at all costs. And then I want to go ahead and move on to the second thing that I was bringing up, which is being a good citizen. There are a number of things that are really important to being a good citizen. One of them, for example, is having a historical framework from which you can put things in context. I do think history is extremely important. I don't think it's important to necessarily have precise dates, but having a general around this time is useful. For example, knowing roughly when Thomas Jefferson was president, around the same time Napoleon was doing stuff, is helpful because it puts things in context. Often, our study of history is also very bubbled. For example, we look at the American Revolution, the American Civil War, and we put them in their own individual bubbles, but they're actually events that occurred in sequence. For example, if you look at the American Revolution, which was occurring in the 1780s sort of time frame, late 1770s, early 1780s, and then the Civil War was in the middle of the 1800s, right? That's a span of 70 years. Think about that. The American Revolution during the Civil War would have been kind of to us what, at the time of this recording, World War II would have been. Still pretty recent memory. When you think about that, that's a very different sort of point of view, a very different perspective. Now, having that sort of idea of sort of the relationship of things is useful, but knowing the exact dates, again, that's something that can be looked up. But having the context of the history of what happened, of what was going on, of what social things occurred, and particularly less focus on individual histories of great people, although that's certainly useful, and more broad histories of societies, political thinking, and trends, those sorts of things can be extremely useful. Stated justifications for things, for why actions were taken, can be very useful to understanding where things came from, where things are going, how people view and assess these things, and what the practical implementations of various ideas have been. We need to know things like how many people died under Stalin. We need to know things like what happened after such and such political leader, such and such political party, such and such political movement took power in this country. We need to know more things about the history of Africa. Like, Africa needs to be countries and not just a continent with a name. There are a lot of different countries there. But how well are we taught any of that sort of stuff? How well are we taught what happened when the Europeans came and cut everything up and then shoved people groups together in horrendous ways and then left a social mess in their wake? We're not really taught about a lot of these things. Or not well, at least not when I was in school. Now, there's something else that's also very important, and that's knowing how to be a citizen. Things like paying taxes. How many of you in school were taught how to pay your taxes? Like, seriously. Why aren't we teaching high schoolers how to pay their taxes? If there are places that are doing that, that is awesome, and there need to be more. Other things like how interest works, how debt works, the impact of credit card debt, or even calculating out the impacts of student loan debt are all things that would be very useful. An understanding of probability and how polls work, and how statistics work, and how different percentages work, and how to interpret information that's presented to you. How to research things well and skillfully is also something that would be a very useful skill in general that I feel like could be more specifically taught. Anyway, these are some of my broad thoughts. So what I would look at more specifically is probably sometime in middle school, late middle school, having the students be shown, like, here are different career paths. Here are the skills necessary to go into them. What do you want to pursue? What do you want to try? And give some time for students to be able to, like, try different fields and see what they actually find interesting and enjoyable and what they might want to pursue, to give them an opportunity to learn about a broad swath of things. So, for example, in mathematics, maybe not having to teach all of the intricacies of geometric proofs, or linear algebra, or calculus, or trigonometry, and saying, here are these concepts, here are these fields, here's what problems you'd use them to solve. Here's why you would need them. And then let people determine if they think that those are going to be useful to their future. But also to tell them if they're going to be useful to their future by saying, hey, here are the fields that are going to need these skills. Here are the fields where you're going to need linear algebra. Here are the fields where you're going to need trigonometry. Here are the fields where you're going to need to know how to do geometric proofs. And the biggest thing that I would want, in many regards, is to have classes where it's very clear why you need this. What's its real-world application? Why are you being taught this? Why is it being required of you? It's always very frustrating to me when I see a student struggling with a subject that I can tell they have no need to actually learn, except that that's the requirement for graduation. We need to get away from the idea that memorizing information, being able to pull facts out of thin air, knowing trivia, and being able to do high-level mathematics are what constitutes smart. Smart is people who can learn from failure. Smart is people who know to ask questions, to go to the people and find the people who know the answers. Smart is people who know how to find information and identify it as being correct when they need it. Smart is being ready to learn, to try and fail and then succeed. We need to teach smart, and different people are going to learn at different rates. Different people are going to have different types of smart, different things that they're good at, different things that they're skilled at. And it seems to me that it's useful and proper to emphasize those skills, to teach things like cooking, for example, to foster independence, teach things like understanding finances and budgets to foster independence, teaching things like how to pay taxes to foster good citizenry, and then to help people learn what they need to know in order to pursue the careers and fields that most interest them, to direct them towards the skills that they're going to be able to make use of to go into a field that is exciting and interesting to them, rather than forcing them to memorize yet another thing from history that is like, in this date, such and such thing happened, rather than forcing them to learn mathematics that they have no use for and they don't comprehend, rather than forcing them... Okay, so I just want to take an aside. What is up with gym class? Like, think about it for a moment. Physical activity is important. Absolutely. Learning how to take care of your body is important. I don't have any objections to fitness classes. But why are we spending actual class time teaching games? Football, soccer, badminton. These are games. Why are we spending time teaching those? If you're going to teach that, why don't you have chess class? Seriously. Like, why don't you have, I don't know, pick some other sort of more intellectual thing. How about StarCraft 2? That has a tournament scene. Why not have StarCraft 2 pro classes or something? Like, this is a complete aside, but like, seriously? Seriously? You're going to dedicate classes to teaching people sports? Those are games. Like, sure, offer them, but then offer intellectual sports too. Why not? Anyway, that's my rant. So anyway, I would love to see changes to the education system that emphasize learning through failure, because that's how it works, that emphasize critical thinking and analysis skills, that emphasize being able to research and know how to look things up effectively and look them up in resources that are accurate, and how to actually be an independent citizen with things like preparing food for themselves, paying taxes, understanding budgets, understanding interest rates and debt and polls, and how probability and statistics and all of those sorts of things work, having a reasonable understanding of how the world that we live in came about, having a rough idea of what's going on around the world, what different places are like. So that way we can understand the world that we live in and we can function in it well, especially in an increasingly globalized world. To be able to say, oh, here's a person from the Czech Republic. What's their perspective on the world going to be like? What did they live through in the past 50 years? Just having a, like, what happened in the past 50 years or the past 100 years in these regions of the world? What is their perspective like because of that? What is our perspective like because of what's happened in the past 100 years here? And having those sorts of frameworks to be able to understand other points of view are going to really help things too, I think. Anyway, I think I've probably gone on long enough about how I feel about the education system. I will add that reforming it is really hard. There's a number of things that are problems. The first one is we know that we have a system that at least sort of functions. Trying to replace it with something unknown and risking people's futures is really scary and really hard to do. I don't know the best way to approach it or how to address it, but I do think something needs to be done. The other thing is that funding for education is absolutely a worthwhile investment, but it's really hard to convince people that it is, and there can also be other issues that can come up with it depending upon how it's done. I don't know the best way to address that. Taxes and finance and government budgets and all of that is a very complicated, very difficult subject, and convincing people that they need to pay for the education from a public school standpoint, like, it's important because if you try to make it entirely private, you're going to run into the problem of there's going to be so much discrepancy based on the financial capabilities of the parents that is just not fair to the kids. At the same time, we need to find ways of actually getting education well funded and finding ways of providing programs for students, of finding ways to support rather than condemn struggling students, socially speaking, of making them feel like they are able to succeed even when they're struggling, rather than feeling like utter failures. And I kind of feel like the grade and grading systems emphasize that they punish on that end, and probably need to be rethought. But there's a lot of reform that needs to happen. I've only kind of scratched the surface, I feel. But these are my current thoughts. I'm absolutely welcome to information that changes them, to new perspectives that people have, to different ideas. Anyway, this has been a very long one, so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. Until next time, everyone. If you want to, you can email me directly at sientir@gmail.com. You can like me on Facebook at facebook.com/SientirsRamblers. And you can support me financially at patreon.com/Sientir. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.